Before all that, it was announced yesterday that all adults with learning disabilities would be prioritised in the vaccination rollout after experts warned that they were at greater risk from the virus.
Well, the decision is a major win for disability charities and campaigners, including Radio DJ Jo Whiley. Last week, she spoke out about being offered the vaccine before her 53-year-old sister, Frances, who later tested positive for coronavirus following an outbreak in her care home.
Well, thankfully, Frances recovered after being hospitalised, and Jo is joining us now with her reaction to the news. Jo, good morning. It's lovely to see you this morning. So let's talk about Frances first of all, and just explain a little bit about her condition and what that means for her everyday life.
First of all, Frances had a syndrome called Cri du Chat. I mean, she's not very typical. I think she's something of a one-off, and I think that's been proved over the last week or so. But Frances is a larger-than-life character. Once you've met her, you never forget her. She's a legend. She's got a very, very loud voice. She loves music. She's very, very affectionate, and she's just gorgeous. And she'll be very excited that she's on the programme, and you can see her face on the television.
Oh, good.
Morning, Frances.
Morning, Frances.
And so, when did she go into the care home?
Oh, she's been in the care home for quite a few years now, so it's her home. But she comes back to mum and dad's every 3 weeks, and that's very much her routine. And, you know, she looks forward to those weekends when she's there. She sees my dad every week for bingo. And with the pandemic, that has obviously impacted so much on the people of lives who've got learning disabilities. So she had bingo taken away from her. She wasn't able to come home. And when the pandemic first started, we made the decision to take her from the care home and have her back with mum and dad, because we just couldn't conceive of how she would be able to cope with not coming back and seeing her parents and being in her home and in the village. And that was great. You know, she had a really, really nice first lockdown. Everything went swimmingly. And then it just got really, really tiring for my mum and dad.
And so the second lockdown, the decision was made for her to go back to the care home, and things were fine to begin with. Everything was moving along quite nicely. But then you noticed that she began to deteriorate, sort of being on her own and being isolated. And so the decision was made to bring her back home with your parents where she could see out the rest of lockdown. However, you didn't quite get that far, did you? What happened?
No, we didn't get that far at all. We were very aware that she was just desperate to get home, and we kept giving her a date. And when she's got a date, that's fine. She can focus on that. So we gave her this date of it being the Friday. You'll be coming home on the Friday. Mindful that we'd been trying to get the vaccine for Frances and all the people in her care home for the last year, and just desperately hoping that that was going to happen, and it hadn't happened. And then on the Thursday night, I finished my show and was met by my husband, and he said, I just have to let you know that someone in the house has tested positive, so Frances can't go home. And that was just, I knew it would be disastrous. I knew for her mental health it would be disastrous. And I was, you know, we just wanted to swoop in and pick her up from the home and bring her back to us, but we couldn't do that because she had to isolate. And from then on, it just played out like, you know, the worst disaster movie ever. Everything that happened along the course of the next few days. I got offered my vaccine, which felt like the cruelest twist. She spent the weekend in the care home, desperate to come home, but also declined. So she refused to take our calls. She normally FaceTimes me millions of times a day during my radio show all the time. And those calls stopped, and we were calling the home, and she just refused to talk to me. She refused to talk to my mum and dad, our mum and dad. And that's never happened before. And that just shows, you know, the impact on her mental health.
Yeah, really, really struggling. And I mean, the thing is awful. When you look forward to something like that, especially, you know, sort of someone like Frances, you know, you've got your bag packed, you expect to be going, and then it's difficult to understand why you're not going.
Yeah, just comprehending. You know, she became quite fixated with Boris's announcements every week. She'd be watching the television, and when he'd say about different things, lockdown lifting, and she'd be going, "Yay, Boris!" and was really cheering. But this was the flip side. This was, no, you can't go out. You have to stay in. And because she's got challenging behaviour, she wouldn't stay in her room. The others did stay in their rooms, but she just wandered around. And then ultimately we got the news that she'd also tested positive for COVID. And in fact, all the people in the care home tested positive, and many of the carers as well. So it was catastrophic.
And which only emphasises your point why it was so important for those types of care homes to get the vaccination early, because this is what happens. She did deteriorate pretty quickly, actually, and she ended up in hospital, and it sounds like you had the most horrific time. I mean, firstly for Frances, who found it very difficult to understand what was going on and not quite understanding the treatment she desperately needed, which was the oxygen, which was so low in her system, but having that on her face was something that she didn't want at all. Your mum wasn't sleeping because she was sitting there all night sort of holding the oxygen mask on her face while she was asleep to try and boost the levels. And it got really serious.
It got very serious. This time last week, the next 24 hours, we thought we were going to lose her. We found out, I would say to everybody, they need to get an oximeter, which is where you can test your oxygen levels. That's how we knew that she was dangerously ill. Took her to hospital. She could not be contained. She couldn't have the mask on her face. And because we couldn't get oxygen into her, her levels just dipped and dipped and dipped. And we got to the point where we were having conversations with the intensive care unit. They were saying they couldn't do anything for her, or it would be very difficult if she was ventilated for her to survive. And then we ended up 4 a.m, Friday night, Saturday morning, discussing end-of-life care, palliative care. And I woke up in the morning on Saturday just imagining next Christmas without my sister, and my mum saying, this is our worst nightmare come true. And it's the thing for the last 12 months that we have dreaded. And it was fact. It was going to be fact. And
you tweeted twice. I mean, you tweeted because of the fact that you thought it was so ridiculously unfair that you, as a healthy woman, had been offered the vaccination, and your sister, who was more vulnerable, had not been offered it. And as it turned out in hospital, you know, you're in the situation where she couldn't take a nasal cannula, she wouldn't wear a mask, she was getting incredibly agitated. You then tweeted your second tweet, which was asking for help. How do you treat someone who can't do this? And then I think the staff contacted Great Ormond Street, and they got a tent built around her. And then that is when you began to see an improvement.
Yeah, I mean, the staff were absolutely incredible. And that proves how challenging it is for people with learning disabilities, because they're all different. And staff will try and do whatever they possibly can. But I was at my wit's end when we'd been told to consider palliative care. I tweeted and I just said, does anyone know what we can do? And they did. They built this oxygen tent, put it over Frances. And in the end, they said, we're just going to have to leave it to Frances. We couldn't sedate her anymore because she reacted in the opposite way to the sedation. She always has. So you try and put her to sleep, you put in so much sedatives into her body, and anybody else would be floored, but not Frances. She just kept on going. She just kept on going. So in the end, they said, right, we're going to stop it. We're going to see what happens to her. And they took the sedation away, and we just watched, like with bated breath, just not knowing what the conclusion was going to be. And she fought it. She fought it on her own. And they think it's because she has this incredibly loud voice. She sings and she dances and she cheers, and she's always shouting hello at random strangers wherever. She's very friendly. And they think that boosted her oxygen levels. So because she's very loud, she's got, you know,
good
a lot of power.
That's incredible, isn't it? So how did you feel then? Obviously, there's relief in your own family that she's home and she's fine and she's well, which is extraordinary when you think what you've been through. But bigger than that, because this suddenly has an impact on people around you, because this change in the law that adults on the Learning Disability Register will now be offered the vaccine.
Yeah, I was very, very aware that we have been extremely lucky. I mentioned there were 6 people in the home. One of them didn't survive. One of her friends passed away a couple of days ago. So you can imagine the impact on the other residents in the house. And that is the story. I know on my social media, I've had so many bereft siblings and parents just saying that their children died, and they did die alone and they couldn't be with them. And it was just heartbreaking, completely heartbreaking. So it's fantastic that the government have listened, because we're all learning. This is a really steep learning curve. I don't think anybody was particularly aware of what it was like for people with learning disabilities, which is why it's important for me to tell my story and for other people to tell their stories, as they have been. And, you know, the government have listened and they've considered what needed to be done. And so the fact that they acted yesterday was just tremendous, amazing. And I think you can see Frances there giving us the thumbs up when she got home from hospital.
That's her favourite bench, isn't it?
Yeah, it's her favourite bench. She sits there and she looks out the rest of the village. They walk past, she shouts out at people, she says hi to the dogs that are passing, she drinks endless cups of tea. And yeah, it's just tremendous to have a home. But also now I'm hearing from lots and lots of other people who are just saying, thank goodness, my brother, my sister, my child has just had their vaccination. We've been trying for weeks and weeks and we couldn't get into the GP, but now the GPs can see people. So the message is that there is a learning disability register, which people might not be aware of. I'm learning all this myself. But if you contact your GP and you say, I'm just making sure that, you know, the person I love is on your learning disability register, on your GP register, can you book them their vaccine? Then they will get their jab. And that is, as I understand it, that is the way it is. That's what people need to do. And yeah, hopefully people
send us her love, won't you? Please do.
Yeah.
And hi to Frances as well, and everyone else watching. Hiya, nice to see you. Thank you, Jo.
Bye, Jo. Bye.